Gongs.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, sharing this dinner together and sharing some wisdom together with Jeff Oliver. These talks are arranged by the Conscious Business community. What we do with these community meetings is pretty much just find or look for a different kind of success story and put it on the stage. And why do we need a different kind of success story? That's a good question, thank you. I saw it in your eyes. Well, let me tell you the classic. I've been a business consultant and consultant within leadership for many years. I was educated in fancy business schools, and I've been into this context for many years. And the success coaches and everything, this is a certain kind of formula in the mainstream consciousness today, and it's I tell you how I achieved all of these things, and then I'll tell you the 10-step plan how you can do the same. This is the recipe for success stories in, I would say mainstream society. So I noticed myself, after I gained some wisdom after some pain in my life, hitting the wall hard, chasing after these kind of goals, that those were not really success stories. That was not the way to achieve the things that I actually longed for. And many of you have experienced this too. And I noticed how being with someone who have done this journey and lived a different life really helps me to find my own integrity and my own nature and allow me to flow. I can tell you many reasons why this kind of vision, goal setting, and then working very hard to achieve it is a very bad idea. I would say if someone suggests you to follow their 10 steps, I would question, for example, is that really success that that person have achieved? Now, if we do that in everyday society, we'll find that most people that come out as the big success, maybe they achieved money, maybe they achieved fame, but the rest of the life might be absolutely disastrous. Relationship, health, and all these things. So the other 358 degrees of life is not considered in the mainstream concept of success. Now, if that person has a 10-step for you, imagine if you are unique. Like if that fingerprint of yours, the scientists are true, that has never existed before, will never exist. Then maybe you should have a different path, and you should have a different kind of success as well. What is success for you? And this is, when we start to question these kind of logics that are so strong within the field of leadership business, then we find, maybe this is not the way, to go. There's also another aspect. If you are unique, and maybe there's a higher purpose with your life, maybe there's a reason why you exist, as this uniqueness of universe right now. And what happens if you start to follow someone else's success, copy someone else's 10 steps? Is there a chance that I will take part of your unique gift? Very little, if so. Copying someone else, and your unique gift, your high purpose, if there is any, will not be shared. And what Jeff is much better skilled at explaining is how chasing after something over there, happiness, contentment, security, or whatever, is one of the best way to condition the mind for unhappiness. And that's actually what we want in the first place, why we chase after these kind of goals. So I'm very happy to put on stage these kind of different success stories, and very honored that Jeff could take the time to share. I was just at a Vipassana retreat with him a few weeks back and got very inspired. So we are curious about your story. How did you end up, a monk and now a surfing freestyle monk? It's a fascinating journey. So yeah. I allow you to freestyle. If you want question or something, just let us know.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I was very happy listening to you, though. Nice to see you all here tonight, and nice to be in this dojo. I haven't been in a dojo for a while, although we were actually in the dojo in Ukraine, weren't we?
We were.
That was nice. surfing freestyle. I just came back from Sumbawa and did a few days of surfing there, which was pretty amazing. Just something random. A friend just said, "Hey, why don't you come to Sumbawa? We're surfing here." I was like, "Okay." And yeah, it was so beautiful. Nice to be back in Bali. As you may know, I'm from Australia, and we live quite a beautiful lifestyle in Australia. It's rather expensive these days to live, but we also get paid very well, I think. Not that I really know about that because I don't actually work, but people seem to be paid quite well and live quite well in Australia. But we also have a lot of nature, a lot of opportunity to live at the beach, which I've had all my life. My parents have a house near the beach, and I've always considered that home, my home, which is something that not many people have these days, is the same home for their whole life. So I've always called my home, where I was as a child, it's still my home, and I live there now. So I think not too many people are able to say they have the same address for their whole life, which is another simple and beautiful thing about my life. So growing up in Australia is so nice to have beaches, forests, and have a lot of wide open spaces, a lot of opportunities. When I grew up at school, at our school, in high school, we had a program or a subject called careers. So once a week we'd do, I think it was a 40-minute lesson on careers, where you got to scan through books, not internet in those days obviously, about, what would you like to do with your life? I could never find anything. My whole life I didn't actually know what I wanted to be, and it was a bit embarrassing because, guys wanted to be firemen or, doctors or things, and I was like, if anybody asked me, I just said, I'll be a fireman, because I didn't know what else you were supposed to be. And it wasn't until very late, I would say, in my life, actually, it was 29, that I realized that what I was supposed to be, or destined to be, or what my karma was, which is the way I would prefer to put it, was to become a Buddhist monk. So it's no wonder I couldn't find that in the careers book. It wasn't a listed option. Probably I could have become a Christian priest, but that certainly didn't appeal to me. So actually, for about 29 years of my life, I was what I would call a lost puppy. I didn't have any direction in my life. I did what everybody else did, and probably didn't do that particularly well. I wasn't looking for a career. I just bounced around, did things. Traveling was fantastic. So for me to work, get some money, and then travel. My first big travel was about 9 months, and I went to Europe. Actually came to Bali in 1987, and came to Ubud, and it was literally a village without. There wasn't even a tarred, sealed road here, or there might have been one. The monkey forest was here, I remember that, and actually off the main little square off Jalan Hanuman, where there's, where Radiantly Alive and those places are, there was that kind of grid there. I think that existed, and that may have had a sealed road, but beyond that was just all villages and jungle, etc. So traveling was very appealing to me. I traveled to Europe, traveled all around Europe, maybe about 16 countries or something. Came back home to Australia and was again a little bit lost, traveled around in Australia. But eventually I started to spend more time in nature and spend time alone. And I think if anyone would really like to understand themselves and perhaps find themselves, I think spending time alone in nature is a really good way to do it. Whatever nature suits you, maybe it's a beach, but alone at the beach. Or, you know, in the mountains, maybe in the jungle, if you can do that. To spend time in nature really gives you time to think, even if you're not a meditator and you don't know how to perhaps correctly or effectively use the workings of your mind to find what you're looking for or to perhaps find an answer. But to spend time in nature, I think nature, it doesn't talk back to us or it doesn't argue with us. So we're allowed to be ourselves. And in that way, I think we find a harmony, we find nature within ourselves. So having spent a lot of time in nature, I used to just sit, I'd go to a forest and I'd just sit in the forest, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I realize now that I was doing some kind of meditation. And I would just be a rock in the forest, or, you know, stand and just be a tree in the forest. A very innocent form of meditation, if you like. Becoming one with nature, which, you know, all these years later I understand that's actually what meditation is. So I had some really good karma, actually, that guided me to do that. But again, I didn't really know what I was doing. So then I decided that I needed to find a teacher, someone who could guide me, and I left home at the age of 29, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit earlier. And I decided I was going to go to Asia and find a teacher. And I didn't know what kind of teacher I was going to find. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know whether it was going to be maybe Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim. I was completely open. And I had no time frame to find this place or person or such. So I started backpacking in Australia, actually just hitchhiking, walking up the east coast, which was in itself a very beautiful experience. And again, just camping, staying by myself. But then I came to a place that's famous in Australia, a little bit like the Ubud of New South Wales or the north coast of Australia. It's called Nimbin. It's a place where there's been lots of drugs and sorts of things. It's got a bad reputation, but then it has a good reputation for alternative lifestyle. And I went there out of curiosity, and I found a really beautiful community where people were all living together, and I was actually going to buy onto this community. I was going to use the money that I'd saved to travel, and I was going to buy a little plot of land on this community, and I was going to build a little house and live there. And I kept asking people about meditation. What's meditation? How do you meditate? And people told me this and told me that. And previously I'd been into crystals and the Wilderness Society and, you know, Reiki, and I was attracting and meeting all of these kind of peoples. I was already vegetarian. I had become vegan, which was pretty interesting. What was it? Nearly 30 years ago. So I went, somebody said, oh, there's going to be a Vipassana meditation retreat up in the forest. You should go to that. I think that would suit you. I went, I didn't know anything about it. It was a 7-day retreat. And the teacher was an ex-Buddhist monk from he was a Buddhist monk in Thailand, but he himself was an Englishman. His name was Christopher Titmus, and he still teaches what I believe is basically the same thing as me, a freestyle vipassana meditation. So I went to this retreat not knowing anything. At some point, we were able to go and ask him questions. And I went to ask him one day, I said, it was probably about 3 or 4 days into the retreat, which I was loving, really just being in the nature and learning. And actually he blew me away with his wisdom and the way he explained things, which of course was Buddhist wisdom, and some of his own wisdom and experience. And in fact, one of the things that really blew me away was just in a talk one night, which I really enjoyed his talks. He said, the future doesn't exist. And that really, really shocked me. I don't know if anybody had ever said that to me before in my life, that the future doesn't exist. But if I did hear it, it wasn't, it didn't mean anything to me. I wasn't ready to hear it. When he said it, I had multiple reactions. I was happy because I knew it was true, and I was happy to hear the truth. It was like, yeah, of course the future doesn't exist. But then I was kind of angry because, like, hang on, for 29 years, I've been living in the future. I was always thinking where I was going to go, what I was going to do, who I was going to be, what I was going to say, what was going to happen. My mind, I realized, was always in the future. And it was like, shit, I just wasted my life. And that was a real slap in the face. And then I was kind of angry also because why didn't somebody tell me this when I was 2 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old, or whatever? Why isn't this common information? Why aren't people, our family, our people all around us, just kind of reminding you on a daily basis, Jeff, you know, the future doesn't exist. And then you would be like, oh yeah, you know, when you're maybe 10 years old or 15 years old, slowly it might sink in and you go, oh, of course the future doesn't exist. But to be 29 years old and a man, I don't know if I was a man or not, but you know, I was supposed to be one. And then somebody just comes along and says, future doesn't exist. You're like, what? Okay, so that kind of changes the plan. The plan being the future. So I went and talked to him one day and I asked him, I said, you know, I was thinking of buying into this property here and, you know, establishing myself. I've got, you know, this much money and whatever. Or, you know, I'm thinking to travel and maybe explore and, you know, discover the world. I said, what do you think I should do? He said, and quote, there is no doubt in my mind you should travel. Unquote. And I went, that's exactly what I would have said if somebody asked me what should I do. So that was it. I was off. I stayed for the retreat. I then served on the next retreat and talked to more Vipassana people. And they told me there's a Vipassana center in the Blue Mountains near Sydney. So I thought, right, I'll go there. So I hitchhiked back, did a big loop, went all the way back down to Sydney. And I did 2 Goenka courses. So when you hear the term Vipassana, most people know Vipassana as the standard 10-day silent course run by Goenka, which is kind of like boot camp for your mind. It's really like sit down, sit still, 1 hour, do your anapanasati, do your mindfulness of breathing, and then after a few days they do that. Every sitting is mindfulness of breathing, and after that they then teach you how to scan your body. So most people in the world, and that organization is phenomenally successful. They're in over, I think they have more than 50 centers around the world, and that was actually quite some time ago I got that info, so it's probably hundreds by now. And very successful. So he was a businessman, so he took this model of Vipassana and he just basically, he just did the same thing, and it's still happening. You still repeat the same teachings whenever you go to a Vipassana course. So I did 2 of those, and yeah, I was kind of natural at it. It suited me. I was happy to sit. I would sit after the bell and wait for the next sitting to come, and I'd even do that like 3 times, like sit nearly 3 hours on like my 2nd or 3rd retreat. So it was kind of natural for me to do that. Then I was told about a Buddhist monk that was running a retreat. So I went to his retreat, and that was my teacher, who became my teacher, my master. And he's still alive, and he is in Myanmar, in Burma, and that basically became the tradition that I followed. On that retreat, he said to me, he could see that I was very diligent in my practice and really absorbing everything that he said. I said I would like to become a monk. And actually on my first retreat up in the forest, I decided on that retreat that I would become a Buddhist monk, and probably in Burma, because I'd traveled there and felt the energy of the place, and I had some affinity with it. So I did that retreat with him. He said, come to Burma and you can be a monk in my monastery. Have some friendly little bug trying to say hi. So then I went on to do quite a few Vipassana retreats. Once I knew what Vipassana was, that was what I wanted to do. So I did some retreats with some Western teachers that came to Australia, and the more I did, the more I learnt, the more I was so sure that that's what I wanted to do. And then I went to Burma, so I kind of packed up my stuff. Actually, I was going to go to Burma and become a monk for, I thought, 2 months for the Rains Retreat, which is the annual retreat that Buddhist monks do. And when I arrived, my teacher said, oh, so how long will you stay? I said, oh, I'll stay 2 months for the Rains Retreat. He said, Rains Retreat is 3 months. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll stay for 3 months. But that was like basically an indication of how ignorant I was and how little I knew about what I was doing. But I was so inspired, I'd actually found direction in my life. In fact, that first retreat was basically what I'd been looking for all my life, but I didn't know what I was looking for. I had to find it in order to realize, oh, that's what I'm looking for. And I think a lot of people might be like this, that we get around on the planet where it seems that we're all looking for something, but most of the time we don't really know what we're looking for until you find it, and then it's kind of like, oh, I didn't know this was what I was looking for. You know, it's a little bit like people are looking for reality, and it's like, do you know what reality is? Do you know where to find it? Or people might be looking for enlightenment, and it's like, yeah, it's okay to look for enlightenment, it's a beautiful thing, but do you know what you're looking for? Because you haven't experienced it yet, and you actually won't know it until you experience it. So it's a funny thing, it's a phenomenon about our life, that we are searching, but we don't necessarily know what it is that we're searching for. Even if we have a name or a label for it, you actually don't know what it is until you find it. So it's good to have a direction, but it's also good to not necessarily be attached to that direction. To set a goal, set a point, set some, if you like, GPS marker or point, head in that direction, but then open your mind up to, well, anything can happen. So I have these 3 little tips that I learned actually through sitting meditation, and I applied them to my life. Probably, I don't know how long it is now, it might be about 10 years, I'm not sure. But when I sit down to meditate, I realized that when I was sitting to meditate, I would have expectation. I'd be thinking, oh, I'm gonna watch my breath, I'm going to be so pure in my mind, I'm going to be concentrated, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to get this experience, I'm going to get that experience. Because the more you meditate, the more because you're just feeding your ego, by the way, most of the time while you're meditating, which is not really meditation, but we don't know that, so we do it anyway because that's what we're accustomed or conditioned to do. So most meditations are actually just feeding your ego. But as you get better at meditation, or what your ego thinks is better at meditation, then you think, oh, now I've got it, now I know how to meditate, I only have to do this and I do that and I'm going to get this and I'm going to get that. So pretty much every time you go into meditation, you're going in with this big bags full of conditioning and egoistic desires, etc. And then you meditate with that. And if you get it, then of course that feeds the ego and says, well, I got what I was looking for, and I'm a really good meditator, and you all should do what I do because I'm really good at it. And so this feeds our, if you like, spiritual ego, or our meditation ego, which is a slightly better ego than your ordinary sort of garden variety ego. So then what I realized was that I was sitting down with expectations in my mind. And my teacher said, way back in the beginning, expectations are yogi poison. They block the yogi from achieving what the yogi wants to find, or what the yogi wants to achieve. This is very interesting. It took me also a long time to realize this. But what I found was that every time I got insight, every time that I had one of these awakening moments, it was because I wasn't expecting it. So success, in this spiritual terminology, realization, awakening, would happen when there was the absence of expectation. That's a really interesting little formula there. When you're not expecting something, you actually get something. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what am I expecting? What am I looking for? What do I really want? Not necessarily in that order. You can actually take that in the other order. What do I want? What am I looking for? What am I really looking for? And am I expecting to get that? So according to my experience, I got what I was looking for when I wasn't expecting it, which means I had to let go of what I was looking for. Then what do you do if you let go of what you're looking for? Then you be in the present moment, which is basically the teaching of the Buddha, and as you now know, mindfulness teachings all around the world. They're asking us or suggesting to be in the present moment. Great teachers like Eckhart Tolle, be in the moment, the power of being here and now. So these 3 things that I say, the first thing I say is, I don't know what will happen. That means I don't know the future. Doesn't matter whether I'm about to sit down for meditation, and I could be perhaps fairly correct in predicting what's going to happen if I sit down and meditate. But it would still just be guesswork, because the truth is, I don't know. The second thing is, anything can happen. So the first one is, I don't know what will happen. Second one is, anything can happen, which is also the truth. Isn't it the truth? Anything can happen at any moment. We live in what we believe is a fairly predictable state of life, but actually living in Bali and in Ubud, life becomes a lot more unpredictable. I got completely lost coming here, which wasn't predicted. Unpredictable, so anything can happen. Nice reminder. And then the third one that I say to myself is, I'm just going to watch and learn from what happens. Again, back in the present moment. I don't know what's going to happen. Anything can happen. I'm just going to watch, observe, and learn from what happens. For me, this is like the ultimate human experience, is to be purely in the present moment with a completely open mind, not expecting anything that's going to happen, and just being completely here and now, and going with the flow. Having said that, I'm not perfect at that, of course. So this is also part of the understanding that we come to realize, is that my mind is constantly changing. I'm a work in progress. I'm always going to be learning things. So there isn't perfection as such. Even if something is perfect, it's in a state of change. So it might be perfect in the moment and say, wow, this is really perfect. But then you realize, well, this perfection is also in a flow, in a flux. It's changing, it's fluctuating. Which is also a nice reminder. Everything's impermanent. Everything's in a state of change. So, just rewinding. I was a monk for, as my teacher asked, how long are you staying? I said 3 months. I stayed about 2.25 years because I realized I had nowhere to go and I had nothing to do. And I had this little, what somebody called a monk's cell, which was, I don't know, made me think of a prison cell, but a little room in a building in Yangon, in Rangoon, the capital of Burma, Myanmar. And I had a bed and a table and a chair and a window. And outside the window I could see a massive mango tree, and I could see some of the car park and what went on in the monastery. In that room, actually for some time, I'd meditated so hard in the meditation hall that I'd actually developed some, if you like, sores or, from sitting on the hard floor, because I was a bit too enthusiastic, or I don't think it was masochistic, but anyway, I was very determined to practice, and I pushed myself so hard. I was going through the barriers of pain and other things that I needed then to take a little rest in my room. So I continued to meditate sitting on my bed, on my pillow in my room. And I spent about a month practicing in my room, just with this little window to the world. Okay, I went out, I had a meal, I came back, and that's where I stayed. And I realized in that room, I didn't need to go anywhere. I didn't need to do anything. Everything I needed was here and now. So that's a kind of success that you can't imagine. People don't know what that kind of success really means. In our world, we are so pumped full of information about what supposed success is, that when you arrive in a state of mind, in a state of equanimity, a balanced mind, contentment, some degree of satisfaction. You realize that you don't need anything else. I didn't need to go anywhere. I didn't need to travel around the world anymore. I didn't need the things that I had always thought that I needed. I didn't need music. I didn't need to, have my own place. I didn't need to eat at, any hour of the day and night. I didn't need sex. I didn't need to go surfing. I didn't need anything. So there was actually a really amazing freedom. Some foreigners, when they came to the monastery, a little bit like I did when I got there, I arrived and I thought it was in the city. And outside our monastery was a bus stop. And if you've ever heard a bus stop in Burma, it's all ba ba ni ni da da ba ba and guys shouting about the destinations of where all the buses are going to. So they're shouting Sule, 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 and shouting all the different names. So there's shouting, there's horns honking, and then there's the traffic noise right outside the monastery. So you arrive there as a foreigner, you think, because I'd travelled to Burma before, I thought I was going to Bagan, like these ancient temples and just, silent monks shuffling around in the corridors and, just silence and stillness and peace and everything. And I arrive at this busy city monastery, which actually turns out to be perfect for Vipassana, because Vipassana isn't about stillness and silence. It's about living with the actual situation of what's happening in the present moment. So it turns out that was the perfect place, for me anyway. So, having lived in that little room and reflected on my life and the world from there with mindfulness, with the insights that I had already gained, I then, I'll have to cut the long story short, I think. I stayed for about 2.5 years, and then I went back home because I was really only going for 2 months. So I went back home, I disrobed temporarily, and I fixed up everything in my life, sold stuff, gave stuff away, and I went back and became a monk again. And this time it was indefinite, meaning I didn't know how long I would be a monk. I took robes again, and again, long story short, I stayed as a monk for about 6 years. And during that time, my teacher sent me to South Africa, where I lived for 3 years in a house that was determined as a Burmese Buddhist monastery in South Africa. Pretty weird little chapter of my life, but very beautiful as well. Then in 2002, I started to wonder what it would be like to be an ordinary guy again, and my mind was oscillating between being a monk and being a layman, and it just got to a point where I thought, I'm kind of making myself a bit crazy here, just thinking, I'd get up in the morning and I'd think, I'm going to disrobe, I'm going to become a layman. And then in the afternoon it'd be like, no, I'm going to be a monk, I'm going to be a monk for the rest of my life. And then later on that night I'd be thinking, maybe, it might be interesting. Anyway, I decided to disrobe, and then I was offered a job in Thailand in a school, an alternative school, and they kind of wanted someone like myself who spoke English quite well and was a meditator. They wanted me to work in their school to help the kids to have some meditation training, some mindfulness, etc. But it didn't work out. And then I was kind of sponsored by a monk who wanted to develop a Vipassana program for his monastery and his university. So I stayed in the monastery, and I lived in a Buddhist monastery in Bangkok for about 3 years. 2 or 3 years, and just running small retreats here and there. And then I was invited to Turkey in 2005, and that really changed my life. I was invited by a former student who found out that I wasn't a monk anymore, because Turkey is an Islamic country, and so I was invited to teach in Turkey. Again, long story short, 13 years later, I'm still teaching in Turkey, and I teach my freestyle Vipassana. I'm not teaching Buddhism as such. I still call it Vipassana because people can relate to that. So I teach Vipassana in plain English, and it's well received. And that helps me to understand that this teaching is not just for Buddhists. It's actually for anyone. It's for human beings to understand their own true nature. And I've learnt so much by being in Turkey as well. I love their culture, I love Sufism. I found many similarities and things that go very beautifully with Sufism and Buddhism. I love to meet Sufis, and I also love to practice whirling, as in a whirling dervish. So in these years, since 2002 until now, I have only lived by donations. I have never set a price for the teachings, because I was a monk for about 8.5 years, basically, altogether with those 2 ordinations. And nobody put out their hand at the end and said, right, now you have to pay up. I got free teachings, spiritual teachings, teachings that are universal. They belong to the universe. They belong to all beings. They don't belong to Buddhist monks or Buddhist monasteries or, other organizations. The Buddha's teaching is open for anyone to investigate. In fact, it's a quality that he said is a quality of his teachings, is that it's open for anyone to come and investigate. So I live by that now, and have done for all these years. Sometimes I get a lot from a donation. Sometimes an individual really loves what I do, and they'll give me quite a nice donation. And then I meet others who maybe don't really like what I do, and maybe not convinced, not sold, maybe they didn't really feel it. By the way, I'm not selling anything, so I couldn't sell anything to anybody anyway. So sometimes I don't get anything, and sometimes I get a lot. But what happens is it balances itself out. And I understand that this is the universe, or this world, this human realm that we live in, is a world of yin and yang. It's a world of balance. Doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not, it is. And this planet, this little globe that we're on, it's round shaped. It must be balanced. It's balancing itself. And even the nature is balancing itself. It knows what to do. Look at all the shit that we throw at nature, and it still keeps pumping out the oxygen, the sun keeps shining, we've still got fresh water. It's still all happening for us. I know there could be a time when we really, really destroy this planet. But up until now, it's been able to cope with what we've been doing with it. So I believe that the universe, this world, is in balance. And then when I look in my body, I realize my body also knows what to do. All this time I've been talking, it's been breathing by itself. Not one moment did I stop and think, oh, am I breathing? Oh, hang on, I need to breathe in. Oh, now breathe out. I didn't give instructions to my body to do anything. It's doing it by itself. All the systems are working. It's perfect. It balances itself. When I get sick, or if I get cut, I get hurt, then it heals itself. Basically, sometimes I might need to help it, but generally it heals itself. And as we're learning now more and more, even through scientific means, both spiritual and scientific means, where we are learning that we can heal ourselves. You can heal even the worst diseases, cancers and other things. There are even people who have healed their broken backs and broken bones and other things just by the power of their mind. So we have this ability to understand the balance or the pure nature of this world. When you understand that, you don't have anything to worry about. It would be a really nice experiment, and maybe I'm part of that experiment, to really honestly let go of the future and just allow things to unfold exactly as they do. Basically what that means is you trust. You trust that what you need will come. This is also understanding the law of karma. Remember years ago, The Secret came out and the law of attraction. In that they said, this is ancient teachings. But it seems that through history there are certain individuals that were able to grasp that and utilize it, actually manipulate it. And there are people, and I believe, maybe groups or organizations that are still doing that these days. But Buddha was teaching something very different. He was teaching letting go. He was teaching trust. He was teaching faith. Faith here doesn't mean a religious faith. Faith here means even faith in yourself, faith in your body, faith in the world, faith in nature. The Buddha's teaching, the word that he gave to his teaching is dharma. Dharma, or at least dhamma in Pali language, which I learned, dhamma means nature or natural law. So what was the Buddha teaching? He was teaching natural law. What are we? We are nature. I am nature. I can't be separated from nature. I am nature. I don't have to go out into the jungle to find nature. Nature is already in me. When I understand this, and if I trust nature, which I think most of us do, right? You'd much rather trust nature than you would some guy trying to, sell you a car on the street or something. So this is why, coming back to the beginning, why it's so great to spend time in nature. Because you can trust it. We feel safe in nature. When you find your own inner nature, you feel safe in yourself. You trust yourself. You trust the flow. You trust your karma. Be it good karma or bad karma in the past, it's going to have its effects. It's going to have its effects anyway, whether you like it or not. So it's better that you practice mindfulness to be in the present when your karma arises, pleasant or unpleasant. Then you start to trust. Then you stop creating more and more karma, or you start creating more pleasant karma or more neutral karma, and thus your life flows. I'm going to stop now. Could have kept going for a good couple of hours. I was just warming up. But I know we have to have some dinner tonight. And maybe I've sparked your curiosity. Maybe you have a question, and I'd really like that, because I'd be able to then maybe fine-tune something if you're interested. Any questions? Comments? Yeah. Just speak up in a big voice.
Yeah, I would like to know exactly that process, if you remember when you kind of switched from being into the monastery to kind of starting to wonder whether to come back. Where is that coming from?
The process of when I was switching between, shall I be a monk?
Why going back?
Oh, so
why going back to society? Yeah.
Oh, why go back to society? Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I found many different reasons in myself why I became a layman. So when I became a monk, the most common question people asked me was, why did you become a monk? Because they could see that I was a pretty normal kind of guy. I wasn't like, didn't look like there was anything wrong with me why I went and became a monk. So they're asking, why did you become a monk? And my answer was, because I wanted to understand the truth. I also wanted to be a good person. Then when I disrobed, and ever since I've disrobed, people ask me, why did you disrobe? So why did you go back to the ordinary society? It was partly because I wanted to test the teachings. I had become a teacher of Vipassana meditation as a monk. But whenever I was teaching, the lay people would say to me, oh, it's okay for you, Dhammarakita, which was my name. It's okay for you, Dhammarakita. You live in a monastery. This is easy for you to do. I live in the real world. How am I going to be mindful when I'm at the office? Or when I'm, I have to look after my kids? Or I have to, I get stuck in the traffic? Or all of the life's problems? Actually, this teaching is so applicable to daily life that we don't really understand how perfect mindfulness fits into everyday situations. So mindfulness with a view to understanding, to getting wisdom, to getting insight. It's the wisdom that allows us to navigate life securely, safely, clearly, comfortably, but also in a way that we can develop more wisdom as we go. So mindfulness is the start. Insight or wisdom is actually the thing that changes your mind. Mindfulness itself is not really changing your mind. It's wisdom. It's understanding. And then you continue to use that wisdom. And then wisdom becomes your guide instead of being like a lost puppy, as I was, which was ignorance was my guide. So I wanted to test the teachings in the real world, if that's an applicable term. Because as a monk, I think I've experienced much more of the real world than people do in the real world. Thank you. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah, just speak up. Yeah.
What money is?
Sorry?
Like, what is money mean?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, what is money?
Yeah.
And what does money mean to me? Perhaps. Well, it's my perspective on money.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Money, as many people are calling it these days, they're calling it energy, which it is, I guess. It's also numbers, which in nature, numbers don't exist. So, which is a bit of another shocking realization that I had along my path, that numbers are things that are made up by human beings, and in nature, animals, plants, and nature itself doesn't calculate anything. It doesn't need to calculate anything. Nature knows nature. So there's no need to know how many there are of anything. So in a forest, if there's 100 trees, we would say, oh, look, there's 100 trees in the forest. But in fact, there's one tree, one tree, one tree, one tree, one tree, one tree, one tree. We also apply numbers to time, and time also doesn't exist. In nature, there isn't any such thing as time. There is time, but there is not a numerical time or a chronographic time that we give to, that humans created. So, money is a kind of energy, and when you stop thinking about the numbers, but you start to feel it more as an energetic exchange, you become less attached to it, and then you are able to be more free with it. You are more free to receive it and more free to give it. Knowing, trusting that this is a universe of balance. So if I give something out, it's going to come back. This also is karma. This means that we start to break down our strict and rigid ideas about money, and we start to flow, and we start to trust. If I need money, money will come. But if you then start to expect that money's going to come, that expectation is what's blocking the money from coming. And this is where many people get stuck in business, because they're expecting, okay, I've set up the business, I've done the groundwork for this, why isn't it working? I've done everything I have to do, but they're so full of expectation about what's going to happen that they're blocking themselves. When you drop the expectation, which I can tell you is really difficult to do because we're so conditioned to be full of expectations, to have expectations. When they drop, the floodgates open. Everything changes. which means your mind becomes open. Open mind means you allow things to come in. So when you're open-minded about money, money can flow in. But just remind yourself, it's going to flow in and it's going to flow out. And when it flows out, it's going to flow in. And then you start to become just a conduit for money, a sender and receiver of money. But you don't have to count it. You don't have to be worried about it. Maybe simplify your wishes in life. When you become more simple, more humble, you don't need so much money. When you don't need so much money, then you don't have to work so hard. You don't have to work so hard, then you have more time to do what you love to do, and then you're not stressed, and then you're not going to get diseases in your body, because stress is the largest contributing factor to disease and illness in our societies and in the world. So it goes back to what Jonas was saying in the beginning. People can be really successful, but they can also be really stressed with that success and be really sick, or at least a kind of walking time bomb. But if you want to be really holistically successful, I think it includes good health. Buddha said health is the greatest wealth. Health is the greatest wealth. It's an interesting way of saying it. So when you're healthy, when you're in the flow, when you're in the moment, what money do you need? What time do you need? What do you need to calculate? What do you need to get? What do you need to get rid of? It's so beautiful in meditation when you understand, I'm not trying to get anything, and I'm not trying to get rid of anything. This is not a business deal. This is just being 100% human being here and now. That's all you have to do. And then when you get up, just keep doing that. When you get on your motorbike, just keep being human being. When you go to the cafe, just be human. When you're in your relationship, just be human. Just be 100% yourself. It's actually too easy. There's this cosmic joke, this universal joke, and that is life is too hard, it's complicated, it's full of suffering, etc. But actually, when you understand the cosmic joke, the universal joke, it's too easy. In fact, you don't really have to do anything. Just be present and trust. And the trust comes from the wisdom. So it's automatic. So you don't even have to do that. And you don't have to be present because you're already present. So you just flow. Too easy.
Jeff?
Yes.
Time to move over to the restaurant. Would you like to answer some more questions over there?
Oh, we can do that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So we'll go and have a meal together.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much.